I never thought the worst betrayal of my life would come from my own family. That morning in the Nashville courthouse, my brother sat across from me grinning like I was finally cornered. Then the judge opened my old Army green document case, and the whole room went quiet. But that part came later. Before the court, before the debt collectors, before my mother looked me in the eye and told me I was tearing the family apart. There was just me, my garage in Clarksville, Tennessee, and a life I had worked too hard to make peaceful. My name is Rachel Mercer. I was 44 years old when this happened. Former Army logistics officer. Fort Campbell was still close enough that I could hear helicopters on certain mornings if the wind came in right. I lived about 20 minutes from Post in a small brick house with a cracked driveway, a stubborn coffee maker, and my father's old 1974 Harley sitting in the back bay of my motorcycle shop. I owned Mercer Motorworks, nothing fancy. Mostly oil changes, brake jobs, tire swaps, and older guys bringing in bikes they swore they were just storing for the winter even when it was July. I liked that life. Quiet, honest, mechanical. Engines made sense to me. If something knocked, leaked, burned, too hot, or refused to start, there was usually a reason. People were harder. Especially my brother Evan. Evan Mercer was 39, charming in that dangerous way some people are. He could walk into a room broke, late, and guilty, and somehow leave with somebody offering him a beer and a second chance. Growing up, he was the golden boy. Our mother called him sensitive. Teachers called him full of potential. I called him Evan because I knew the other side too. The missed payments, the fake apologies, the big plans that always needed someone else's money. Still, he was my little brother. After our dad died, I stepped into roles I had no business carrying at 17. I helped Evan with homework. Picked him up when he got into trouble, sent money home when I was overseas, covered a few bills when he said he was between opportunities. That phrase should have come with a warning label. By the time I retired from the Army, Evan was in Nashville calling himself a real estate investor. Lake homes, luxury flips, short-term rentals, glossy folders, expensive boots, a truck so shiny it looked allergic to mud. He looked successful. That was Evan's gift. He didn't have to be solid, he just had to look like it. The first letter came on a Tuesday in March. I remember because I had a Harley Road King up on the lift, and old Mr. Bell from Oak Grove was sitting near the soda machine telling me for the 10th time how his third wife never respected proper tire pressure. The mail carrier dropped a certified envelope on my front counter. I signed for it with grease still under my thumbnail. Inside was a notice from a bank I barely recognized saying I was responsible for a refinance loan tied to one of Evan's properties. At first I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was too ridiculous to process. Then another letter came. Then a call from an investor. Then a packet from an attorney's office. The number finally appeared in black ink on page 4. $670,000. I sat in my office behind the garage staring at that number while the shop radio played some old George Strait song too quietly to understand. I called Evan. He answered on the third ring, cheerful as church bells. "Rach, hey, I was gonna call you." That sentence has never led anywhere good. "What is this?" I asked. He sighed like I was bothering him over a parking ticket. "It's temporary. The market shifted. Once the properties sell, everybody gets paid." "Why is my name on it?" A pause. "Not long, but long enough." "You helped me years ago, remember?" "No, I didn't." "Rachel, come on. You signed some backup paperwork. It was just a safety net." My hand tightened around the phone. "What paperwork?" He lowered his voice. "Don't start acting like I tricked you. You knew I was building something." That was the first chill I felt. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Like hearing an engine make a sound you know means the whole thing is about to come apart. I started digging through old files that night, bank folders, Army records, medical paperwork, deployment documents from when I was preparing to go to Kuwait years earlier. That was when I remembered the hospital. I had hurt my back during training before deployment. Nothing heroic, just one bad lift, one worse twist, and suddenly I was at Blanchfield Army Community Hospital signing a stack of emergency papers in case things went sideways overseas. Power of attorney documents, medical forms, property instructions. My mother had been crying. Evan had been there too, acting helpful, sliding papers toward me saying, "Just sign where they marked it." "Rach, we'll sort everything later." I trusted him. That sentence still makes my stomach turn. A week after the bank letters started, my mother called a family dinner at her house in Hendersonville. I knew it was an ambush as soon as I walked in. Evan was there with his wife Kayla and their 2 kids sitting in the living room watching cartoons too loudly. My Aunt Marlene was at the table, 2 cousins. My mother had made pot roast like comfort food could soften extortion. Nobody asked how I was. That told me plenty. Mom started crying before I even sat down. "Rachel, your brother is going to lose everything." I looked at Evan, then he should explain why my name is on loans I never agreed to. Kayla snapped, "We have children." I said, "I know that." Aunt Marlene leaned forward. "You're single. You don't have the same responsibilities." There it was. The old math. My life counted less because fewer people depended on me. Evan rubbed his face like a man under terrible pressure, but I noticed his watch. Big silver thing. Probably cost more than my first car. He said, "I'm not asking you to pay all of it. Just help stabilize things." "How much?" Nobody spoke. "How much, Evan?" He looked away. My mother whispered, "The bank needs a commitment." I almost laughed again. Almost. So I'm supposed to drain my retirement because Evan built a business out of lies. Mom's face hardened. "Don't talk about your brother that way." That hurt more than I expected. Not because she defended him, she had always defended him. But because for 1 second I saw it clearly. She wasn't shocked, she was disappointed I wasn't cooperating. Evan leaned back and said, "You did 20 years in the Army. I thought honor meant something to you." That one landed. I stood up slowly. "Honor doesn't mean paying for fraud." His eyes changed then, just a flicker, small enough that nobody else caught it. But I did. He never denied it. Not once. The next morning, 2 men walked into my garage while I was adjusting a carburetor on a Softail. One wore a cheap suit, the other held an envelope. "Rachel Mercer." The whole shop went still. Mr. Bell stopped mid-story. My mechanic Luis looked up from the tire machine. I wiped my hands on a rag. That's me. The man handed me the papers. "You've been served." Evan was suing me. My own brother was taking me to court, claiming I had agreed to financial responsibility and was now damaging his business by refusing to honor my obligations. For a second I couldn't move. Not because I was weak. Because humiliation has a way of freezing you before anger gets there. Everyone pretended not to stare. That almost made it worse. I walked into my office, shut the door, and sat down beside my father's old army green document case. The metal latch was rusted at the edge. I ran my thumb over it the way I used to before deployment inspections. Click. That tiny sound brought me back to myself. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. And I sure as hell wasn't going to pay $670,000 for my brother's lies. That afternoon I locked the shop early, drove home through a gray Tennessee rain, and spread every document I owned across my kitchen table. For the first time in my life I stopped asking how to save Evan. I started asking how to expose him. The first lawyer I met with wore cowboy boots that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. His office sat above a coffee shop in downtown Nashville with exposed brick walls and framed country music posters, trying a little too hard to look casual. I drove up there 3 days after getting served, carrying my father's old army green document case like it weighed 50 pounds. Maybe it did. The attorney skimmed through the first 20 pages of paperwork while I sat across from him listening to the hum of traffic outside. Finally, he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "This is ugly. That's why I'm here." "No," he said quietly. "I mean federally ugly." That word stuck with me. Federally. He tapped a page with his pen. "If these signatures were used while you were deployed overseas, we're not talking about some family dispute anymore." I stared at him. He asked, "Did your brother ever have legal authority to sign for you?" I thought about that hospital room years earlier. The fluorescent lights, my back screaming every time I moved. My mother crying softly near the window while Evan stood beside my bed acting helpful. "Temporary paperwork," I said slowly. "Emergency stuff before deployment." "Did you read everything?" I didn't answer right away. That answer embarrassed me more than the debt. I trusted him. The lawyer nodded in that sad way people do when they already know how the story ends. Then he slid the folder back toward me. "I'd need a $75,000 retainer just to start." I almost laughed. 75,000. This could become criminal. Financial institutions don't play around when military deployment records are involved. So what are you telling me? He looked uncomfortable. I'm saying your brother may have done something very stupid. I drove back to Clarksville in silence. The second attorney was worse. Younger guy, expensive haircut, kept checking his smartwatch while I talked. At one point, he actually said, "Well, family misunderstandings get emotional." Family misunderstanding. Like somebody accidentally borrowed your lawnmower too long. Not forged your identity into nearly 700 grand in debt. When he quoted his fee, I stood up before he finished talking. That night, I sat alone in my garage after closing time. Rain hammered the metal roof while the smell of motor oil and cold coffee hung in the air. I opened the old green document case again. Click. Inside were years of my life: deployment papers, medical records, tax returns, VA forms, old photographs, even my father's discharge paperwork folded in the back. I realized something sitting there under those fluorescent lights. Nobody was coming to rescue me. Not lawyers, not family, not the system. If I wanted the truth, I was going to have to dig it out myself. So that's what I did. I cashed out part of my retirement savings the next morning. Hurt like hell, too. You spend 20 years in the Army planning carefully so you don't end up broke at 65, and suddenly you're draining accounts because your own brother treated your identity like a spare credit card. I hired a forensic accountant named Marty Keene out of Bowling Green, Kentucky, retired IRS investigator, thick glasses, smelled faintly like pipe tobacco even though he claimed he quit years earlier. Marty didn't waste words. After 2 hours reviewing documents at my kitchen table, he muttered, "Your brother's either reckless or arrogant." Which one worries me more? The arrogant ones always think they're smarter than paperwork. For the next 2 weeks, my entire life became paper. Stacks of mortgage filings covered my dining table. Bank transfers sat spread across the couch. Sticky notes covered my refrigerator. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. The strangest part, I still ran the garage during the day. So I'd spend mornings replacing brake pads and afternoons trying to untangle shell companies connected to my own family. At around 2 every morning, the house sounded different, quieter, heavier somehow. The kitchen clock ticked louder. The coffee pot hissed. Pages slid against wood. Sometimes the heater kicked on with a groan that made the whole place feel tired. That was usually when doubt hit hardest. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I really had signed more than I remembered. Maybe I was about to destroy what little family I had left. Then I'd find another lie, and the doubt would disappear again. One night I sat there comparing signature dates with old Army deployment records when I noticed something strange. A refinance document had supposedly been notarized in Nashville on October 14th. I pulled my deployment log closer. October 14th was the day my convoy had crossed outside Erbil after a supply transfer. I remembered it clearly because one of our trucks lost a tire in brutal heat, and I spent 6 hours breathing dust and yelling at mechanics while carrying 40 pounds of gear with an injured back. I was over 6,000 miles away from Tennessee. But according to the paperwork, I was somehow signing mortgage documents at a UPS store in Nashville. That was the moment this stopped feeling like confusion, and started feeling criminal. A few days later, Marty called me. "You sitting down?" "Should I be?" "I traced some transfers through one of your brother's LLCs." I leaned against the garage wall. "And he borrowed against your mother's retirement account, too." Everything inside me went cold. "Number?" "He disguised it under a property partnership agreement." I closed my eyes. My mother had spent 30 years working payroll for the school district. She clipped coupons, reused aluminum foil, drove the same Buick for 15 years because she hated car payments. And Evan stole from her, too. The worst part, I honestly didn't know whether she realized it yet. A few days later, I drove to the county records office in Montgomery County chasing another filing discrepancy. That's where I met Linda Garvey. She was probably mid-60s, silver hair, pulled tight, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked at me over the counter and said, "You're the military lady with the fraud case. Small towns, nothing stays private." Guess so. Linda spent almost an hour helping me dig through archived property records most clerks would have brushed off. At one point, she asked softly, "You serve overseas?" "Kuwait." My son was Marines, Iraq. Something shifted between us after that. Not dramatic, just understanding. While the copier rattled behind us, she lowered her voice. My boy told me something before his second deployment. I looked up from the paperwork. He said the scariest thing overseas wasn't the enemy. It was realizing some people back home were willing to use your sacrifice for their own comfort. I didn't know what to say to that. Then Linda fixed me with a hard look. My son never backed down from wolves over there. So why are you backing down from a bunch of wolves in suits? That line stayed with me. A week before court, Marty finally uncovered the piece that changed everything. A recorded business call transcript from one of Evan's investors during a legal dispute. Evan didn't know the call had been preserved. I sat at my kitchen table reading the transcript while thunder rolled outside. Then I saw the line. My sister, she's just a lonely mechanic with military medals. Push hard enough and she'll fold. I physically felt my stomach turn. Not because he insulted me. Because I realized he'd never been scared of what he'd done. He was scared I might finally stop protecting him. Further down the transcript came another line. She still believes in honor and loyalty. That's why she's easy to use. I pushed the papers away and walked outside into the dark. For a while I just stood there listening to rain hit the gravel driveway. I kept thinking about all the years I defended him. Every excuse, every bailout, every warning sign I ignored because he was my little brother. Deep down, maybe I'd known for years something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit what kind of man Evan had become. The night before court, I sat alone in the garage organizing evidence into neat stacks. Deployment records, bank transfers, property filings, transcript excerpts, fraud timelines. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while old Lynyrd Skynyrd played softly from a dusty radio near the tool bench. Around midnight, I finally closed the document case. Click. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From exhaustion. Because the next morning, for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into a fight to protect my brother. I was walking in to expose him. I barely slept the night before court. Around 3 a.m, I gave up pretending and walked out to the garage in my socks wrapped in an old army hoodie that still smelled faintly like machine oil and winter air. The Harley sat in the corner beneath a canvas cover. My father's bike. I pulled the cover back just enough to rest my hand on the handlebars. Cold metal. Solid. Real. Unlike almost everything else in my life lately. By 6:30, I was driving toward Nashville with a thermos of burnt coffee riding in the passenger seat, and my old army green document case buckled beside it like another person. The interstate was packed with commuters, brake lights glowing red through morning fog, country radio hosts arguing about football, normal life happening all around me while mine felt like it was hanging over a cliff. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Not because I thought I'd lose. Because I finally understood something ugly. If I won, my family would never forgive me. And part of me still hated that it mattered. The courthouse sat downtown in one of those big gray buildings designed to make everybody feel smaller than the government. Marble floors, metal detectors, old fluorescent lighting that made everyone look tired. I got there early. Military habit. The security guard at the entrance glanced at my document case and said, "You carrying enough paperwork to start a war in there?" I managed a small smile, trying to end one. Courtroom 4B was already half full when I walked in. And there they were. My family. My mother sat near the front wearing the blue church dress she always pulled out for funerals and difficult conversations. She looked exhausted. Evan sat beside his attorneys in an expensive charcoal suit smooth as polished stone, calm, confident, smiling at people. That smile used to work on me, too. His wife, Kayla, avoided looking at me altogether. 2 cousins whispered the second I entered. Aunt Marlene crossed her arms like I was personally insulting the Constitution by showing up. Nobody waved. Nobody asked if I was okay. I slid into my seat alone. As I set the army green case beside my chair, I noticed Evan watching me. Then he smirked. Not openly. Just enough. Like he already knew how this was going to end. For a moment, fear crawled up my spine so hard it almost made me nauseous. Not courtroom fear. Family fear. The kind that starts when people who are supposed to love you decide your pain is acceptable collateral damage. Judge Mary Ann Holloway entered exactly at 9 o'clock. Mid-50s maybe, sharp eyes, gray streaks in dark hair, no wasted movement. Everybody stood. She scanned the room once before sitting. Let's proceed. Evan's lead attorney handled most of the opening arguments. Smooth voice, perfect posture, the kind of man who probably practiced sympathy in mirrors. He painted Evan as an overwhelmed businessman caught in unfortunate market conditions. Then he painted me as stubborn, emotionally detached, uncooperative. At one point, he actually said Miss Mercer benefited from these arrangements for years before suddenly abandoning her obligations. I almost laughed out loud. Benefited. Meanwhile, my credit score was bleeding to death, and I was eating microwave soup at midnight while forensic accountants searched for hidden shell companies. The attorney continued, "My client simply seeks fairness from his sister." That word again. Fairness. Funny how fairness always seems expensive when other people are paying for it. Judge Holloway finally turned toward me. "Miss Mercer, you're representing yourself today." "Yes, Your Honor." She studied me for a second. Not cruelly, but carefully. I could tell she wasn't sure what to make of me yet. A middle-aged mechanic from Clarksville standing alone against 2 attorneys and a stack of financial claims. I probably didn't look impressive. Good. Underestimating me was already becoming a pattern in this family. The proceedings dragged for nearly an hour. Loan summaries, property losses, business projections. Evan occasionally shook his head sadly like this entire thing hurt him deeply. Then his attorney introduced the signed agreements. The courtroom deputy handed copies toward the judge. I felt my pulse quicken. This was the moment. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses and flipped through the pages. "Miss Mercer," she said, "these signatures appear consistent across multiple documents." I stood slowly. "Your Honor, may I approach with supporting records?" "You may." Every step toward that bench felt unnaturally loud. The sound of my boots on polished floor, the faint rustle of papers, somebody coughing in the back row. I placed my deployment records beside the loan documents. Then I opened the Army Green case. Click. That sound cut straight through my nerves. "Steady hands, Rachel." I slid several pages forward. "These refinance documents were notarized in Nashville on October 14th, I said. At the same time, I was deployed outside Erbil during a military convoy operation. The judge looked down again. Evan shifted slightly in his seat. I continued. I also included Army timestamp records, transportation logs, and communications records, confirming I was physically overseas. Silence. Not dramatic movie silence. Real silence. Heavy silence. The kind where you suddenly hear every tiny sound in the room. Paper moving beneath fingertips, air conditioning humming overhead, a chair creaking softly somewhere behind me. Judge Holloway read the pages carefully. Then she stopped. Turned back. Read one section again. For the first time all morning, Evan stopped smiling. His attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we object to." She raised one finger without looking up. That shut him up immediately. Then she reached for another page. Her expression changed slowly, not shock exactly. Recognition. Like someone realizing a small fire might actually be connected to a gas leak. "Miss Mercer," she said carefully, "where did these financial transfer summaries originate?" A forensic accountant traced them through linked LLC filings. "And these recordings?" I swallowed once. "One of my brother's investors filed separate litigation last year. The call transcript became part of discovery." I handed her the transcript copy. She read silently for several seconds, then longer. The courtroom remained perfectly still. Even my mother looked confused now. Finally, the judge removed her glasses and looked directly at Evan. Not at his attorneys. At him. I had seen officers use that look before overseas. The look right before somebody's life changed permanently. Judge Holloway spoke very calmly. "Bailiff." The room stiffened. "Yes, Your Honor." "Have everyone place their phones on the tables immediately. Nobody records anything. Nobody leaves this courtroom until I finish reviewing these materials." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A nervous murmur spread instantly. One of Evan's attorneys stood up fast. "Your Honor, surely this is unnecessary." "What may be unnecessary," Judge Holloway interrupted, "is your confidence that this case remains civil in nature." That landed like a hammer. My mother's face drained white. Kayla grabbed Evan's arm and whispered something urgently. Evan didn't answer. He looked pale now. Actually pale. Judge Holloway flipped to another page. The transcript. I knew the exact line she had reached because I'd memorized it by then. My sister's just a lonely mechanic with military medals. Push hard enough and she'll fold. The judge's jaw tightened slightly. Then she looked back toward the forged deployment signatures. And that was the moment everything changed. Not because somebody yelled. Not because of courtroom theatrics. Because suddenly everybody in that room understood this wasn't a family argument anymore. This was fraud tied to military deployment records. Federal territory. Judge Holloway folded her hands together slowly. Mr. Mercer, she said, did you knowingly submit financial documents containing signatures obtained while your sister was deployed overseas? Evan opened his mouth. Closed it. For the first time in my entire life. My brother looked scared. And sitting there beside that battered old army case, I realized something strange. I wasn't scared of him anymore. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Judge Holloway asked that question. You could feel the entire courtroom trying to breathe quietly. Evan looked toward his attorneys like maybe one of them could magically pull him out of the hole opening beneath him. But both men had gone stiff in their chairs. The younger one kept adjusting his tie over and over. The older one stared at the transcript in front of him like he wished it had never been printed. Judge Holloway waited. Patient. Cold. Mr. Mercer, she repeated. Evan swallowed hard. I'd need to review exactly what documents she's referring to. The judge tilted her head slightly. She just walked this court through them. His voice changed then, less polished, more defensive. My sister knew I was using temporary leverage to keep projects moving. I almost said something. Didn't. I just sat there with my hands folded over the army green document case while the judge watched him unravel inch by inch. That silence was doing more damage than any argument I could have made. One of Evan's attorneys stood carefully. Your Honor, perhaps we should request a continuance while additional financial clarification is gathered. Judge Holloway didn't even glance at him. Counselor, are you aware these filings may involve identity misuse connected to an active duty deployment? The attorney hesitated. That possibility appears newly raised. Newly raised, the judge repeated softly. Then she lifted one of my deployment records. This woman was stationed overseas while several of these signatures were allegedly executed in Tennessee. Nobody moved. Not even my mother. I looked at her then for the first time all morning. She seemed smaller somehow. Confused, frightened. Like reality had finally started cracking open beneath the version of Evan she'd spent years protecting. And honestly, that hurt worse than I expected. Because despite everything, part of me still wanted my mother to look at me and say, Rachel, I'm sorry. I should have believed you. But people don't change that quickly. Especially parents. Judge Holloway continued reviewing documents while the courtroom stayed trapped in this awful, suspended quiet. Paper sliding, pages turning, someone shifting in a wooden bench. That was it. No dramatic music, no shouting. Just the slow sound of a lie collapsing. Then the judge reached the retirement account documents. I knew the exact second she understood what they were. Her eyes narrowed. Mrs. Mercer, she said, looking toward my mother, were you aware your retirement account had been used as collateral support for these transactions? My mother blinked twice. What? Evan immediately jumped in. That's being taken out of context. Answer the question, the judge snapped. My mother looked at Evan now. Actually looked at him. No, she whispered. And there it was. The first real crack? Evan leaned forward quickly. Mom, listen, it wasn't stealing, it was temporary restructuring. You touched my retirement, she asked. Her voice sounded so small I almost couldn't stand hearing it. Mom? You said those papers were insurance forms. The courtroom went still again. I closed my eyes briefly. Because suddenly I remembered that same kitchen table years earlier. Evan laughing while Mom signed documents she barely understood. Him reassuring her everything was standard paperwork. He'd been rehearsing this kind of manipulation for years. Judge Holloway's expression hardened further. Then things got uglier. Fast. Evan started talking too much. That's what happens when certain people panic. They mistake speed for control. The market collapsed, he said sharply. Everybody acts like this is all my fault. Investors pulled out banks, changed terms, and Rachel always acts morally superior, like she's better than everyone else. Mr. Mercer, the judge warned. But he kept going. You know what my problem was? Everybody expected me to succeed. My father dies. Rachel runs off into the army, and suddenly I'm supposed to carry this family alone. That one almost made me laugh from pure disbelief. Carry the family. I thought about all the deployment birthdays I missed. The money wired home, the car repairs, the rent payments, the years I protected him from consequences because Mom couldn't bear seeing her golden child fail. Then Evan made the mistake that finally destroyed him. He pointed toward our mother. You babied me my whole life, and now suddenly everybody wants to blame me. My mother looked like he'd slapped her. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I stopped feeling angry. Mostly I felt tired. Deep tired. The kind that settles into your bones after carrying something too heavy for too long. Judge Holloway reached for the transcript again. Miss Mercer, she said, did you personally obtain this recording? No, Your Honor. It came through discovery in a separate investor dispute. Did you review it fully? Yes. She nodded once, then looked toward Evan. Mr. Mercer, this court has reviewed statements in which you referred to your sister as she glanced down briefly, a lonely mechanic with military medals. Evan stared at the table. The judge continued. You also stated she would fold under pressure and provide money if sufficiently intimidated. Nobody in my family looked at me. Not one of them. And somehow that hurt more than if they'd screamed. Evan finally muttered I was venting. Judge Holloway's voice turned razor sharp. No, Mr. Mercer, you were describing intent. That sentence changed the entire room. Even the air felt different afterward. One of Evan's attorneys quietly rubbed his forehead like he already saw future headlines forming. Then Evan looked directly at me for the first time since proceedings started. And suddenly there was anger again. Real anger. You could have handled this privately, he hissed. I stared at him for a second. At the expensive suit, the perfect haircut, the man who spent years treating loyalty like a resource he could drain forever. Then I answered calmly. I did handle it privately, Evan. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. For 20 years. The room stayed silent. I covered your debts. I defended you. I cleaned up your messes. I let things slide because you were my brother. I rested one hand lightly on the old green document case. But this stopped being a mistake a long time ago. Evan's face tightened. This is a crime. Nobody interrupted me. Not even the judge. And honestly, that might have been the first time in my life my family truly heard me. Judge Holloway eventually leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. This court finds insufficient evidence to hold Miss Mercer financially liable for the disputed debts at this time. I felt air leave my lungs slowly. Not relief exactly. More like survival. The judge continued. Given evidence presented today involving potential fraud, identity misuse, and financial misconduct connected to military deployment records, this matter will be referred for additional review. Evan's attorney closed his eyes briefly. There it was. No dramatic gavel slam, no handcuffs, no television ending. Just consequences finally arriving after years of delay. My mother began crying quietly beside the rail. Kayla stared straight ahead like she'd mentally left the building already. And Evan? For the first time in his life, nobody rushed to save him. Court adjourned 15 minutes later. People slowly stood, benches creaked. Phones were collected again. Outside the courthouse windows, Nashville traffic kept moving like none of this mattered. Maybe it didn't. But as I picked up the army green document case, I realized something strange. It felt lighter now. Not because the papers were gone. Because I finally stopped carrying Evan with them. The strangest part about winning in court is that life doesn't suddenly feel victorious afterward. Nobody hands you peace in a neat little box. You still have bills, still have sleepless nights, still wake up at 3 a.m. replaying conversations you wish never happened. The Monday after court, I opened the garage at 7:30 sharp like always. Same coffee pot, same stained concrete floors, same old country station playing too quietly near the tool bench. And for a few minutes I just stood there listening to the familiar sounds. An air compressor kicking on somewhere nearby. Traffic rolling past the highway, rainwater dripping steadily from the awning outside. Normal life? It felt almost strange after weeks of living inside legal documents and betrayal. Luis came in around 8 carrying breakfast biscuits and stopped when he saw me leaning against the workbench. "So," he said carefully, "you okay?" That question nearly broke me more than court did, because nobody in my family had asked it. I nodded once, getting there. He handed me coffee. Didn't push. That's another thing I learned through all this. The people who truly care about you usually don't demand performances from your pain. For the next few weeks, life turned messy in small, exhausting ways. My credit still needed repairs. Some accounts stayed temporarily frozen during the investigation. I spent hours on hold with banks listening to terrible elevator music while trying to prove I wasn't responsible for loans attached to my own name. Legal fees chewed through a painful chunk of my retirement savings, too. That part matters. Because stories like this sound satisfying when people tell them fast. But in real life, even justified battles leave bruises. I sold one of my smaller storage properties outside Hopkinsville just to rebuild financial breathing room. Hurt doing it, too. I bought that property after my second deployment, paid for most of it with combat zone savings and years of skipped vacations. Watching it go felt like selling time I could never get back. Still, I kept my house, I kept the garage, and most importantly, I kept myself. Family fallout came in waves. Aunt Marlene stopped speaking to me entirely. One cousin sent me a Facebook message saying you could have ruined Evan's life. I stared at that sentence for a long time, then deleted it. Because people like that never ask who spent years ruining yours first. My mother didn't call for nearly a month. When she finally did, her voice sounded older somehow. "I didn't know," she said quietly. I sat at my kitchen table staring out at the backyard while evening sunlight slid across the grass. "I know. You should have told me sooner." That one almost made me angry again. But mostly it made me sad. Because there was no point fighting over the timeline anymore. Deep down, she had ignored warning signs for years because believing the truth about Evan would have shattered the version of him she needed to hold on to. Parents do that sometimes. They protect the child they remember instead of the adult standing in front of them. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. No screaming, no dramatic reconciliation. Just two tired women sitting with consequences. Before hanging up, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Rachel." And even though part of me had wanted to hear those words for years, they still couldn't undo what happened. A few weeks later, Denise came to visit. Denise Walker had served with me overseas, retired Army medic, tough as railroad steel and somehow still one of the warmest people I've ever known. She showed up carrying grocery bags and acting like she owned my kitchen within 5 minutes. That's friendship at our age. Nobody asks permission anymore. That night we sat in the garage drinking cheap beer while thunder rolled outside Tennessee hills. I told her everything. The forged paperwork, the transcripts, my mother, court. Denise listened quietly while polishing grease off her hands with a rag. Finally, she said, "You know what your problem always was? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You spent your whole life cleaning up messes for people who never planned on changing." I leaned back in the chair. Because the worst conversations are usually the ones that sound true immediately. Denise pointed toward the old Harley in the corner. "Your dad loved that bike more than oxygen. He definitely loved it more than maintenance schedules." She laughed. Then she got serious again. "You know what your father would hate most about all this?" "What?" "That you still think protecting yourself makes you selfish." That line stayed with me. A month later, federal investigators officially requested additional records connected to Evan's business filings. I didn't celebrate. Honestly, by then I just felt empty. Like my anger had finally burned itself out. The real change happened quietly one Saturday morning. The garage was closed, sunlight streamed through the open bay doors, dust floated lazily through the air. I walked over to my father's Harley and pulled the canvas cover away completely for the first time in months. Black paint, chrome worn thin near the handlebars, tiny scratch near the fuel tank from where Dad dropped a wrench sometime around 1987 and swore for 3 straight minutes. I ran my hand along the seat. Then I grabbed a battery pack and hooked it up. Took me nearly an hour to get everything ready. Fuel, oil, connections. Finally, I sat down on the bike and pressed the ignition. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the engine roared alive. Deep, heavy, rattling through the garage walls. I swear that sound pushed something out of me. Not hatred. Not revenge. Fear. All the fear I'd carried about disappointing people. About saying no. About being called cold or difficult or selfish for refusing to sacrifice myself one more time. The engine kept rumbling steady beneath me while hot air drifted through the garage. And for the first time in years, I felt free. These days, I volunteer twice a month helping veterans and military widows understand financial paperwork, mostly basic stuff, spotting scams, protecting accounts, understanding power of attorney documents before signing anything. Turns out a lot of good people get trapped simply because they trust the wrong person at the wrong moment. I also stopped answering certain phone calls. That part took practice. But peace sometimes sounds like silence. Evan and I haven't spoken since court. Maybe we never will again. And honestly, I've made peace with that too. Because revenge didn't feel the way I imagined it would when this all started. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't joy. It was finally setting down a weight I should never have carried in the first place. I didn't destroy my family. I just stopped paying the price for what they'd done. If somebody in your life has ever treated your kindness like an unlimited resource, then you probably understand this story better than you wanted to. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself out there. And don't ignore the warning signs just because they come from people you love.